Bosnia has been inhabited since Neolithic times. In the Late Bronze Age, the Neolithic population was replaced by more warlike Indo-European tribes known as the Illyrians. Celtic migrations in the 4th and 3rd century BCE displaced many Illyrian tribes from their former lands, but some Celtic and Illyrian tribes mixed. Concrete historical evidence for this period is scarce, but overall it appears that the region was populated by a number of different peoples speaking distinct languages. Christianity has already arrived in the region by the end of the 2nd century, and numerous artifacts and objects from the time testify to this. Following events from the years 337 to 395, when the empire split, Dalmatia and Pannonia were included in the Western Roman Empire. The region was conquered by the Ostrogoths in 455 and further exchanged hands between the Alans and Huns in the years to follow. By the 6th century, the Romans had reconquered the area and large parts of the former Western Empire for the Eastern Roman Empire with its capital in Constantinople. The Slavs, a migratory people from southeastern Europe, were allied by the Eurasian Avars in the 6th century, and together they invaded the Eastern Roman Empire in the 6th and 7th centuries, settling in what is now Bosnia and Herzegovina and the surrounding lands. More southern Slavs came in the second wave, and according to some scholars, were invited by Emperor Heraclius to drive the Avars from Dalmatia on the coast of the Adriatic Sea. Around this time, the Eastern Romans speaking Latin were evolving into what was later called the Byzantine Empire, speaking the Greek language. Modern knowledge of Bosnia and the Western Balkans during the Dark Ages were patchy. Upon the looter invasions by the Avars and Slavs from the 6th and 9th century, bringing Slavic languages, both probably gave way to feudalism, only with the might by the Frankish penetrating into the region in the late 9th century. It was also around this time that the Bosnians were Christianized. Bosnia, due to its geographic position and terrain, was probably one of the last areas to go through this process, which presumably originated from the urban centers along the Dalmatian coast or the Croatian coast. In addition to the Slavic-speaking population, a good number of Romanized people remained in South Bosnia by the year 1000, speaking an Eastern Romance language related to Romanian and having retreated into mountainous areas and adopted a pastoralist way of life. They became known as Laks. With time, they assimilated through maintaining specific customs, and the word Lak came to indicate any shepherd. Being well versed with horse breeding, Laks came to dominate trade and caravan from coastal merchant town towards the interior, growing prosperous and coming to dominate entire regions of Hun, thus merging in Bosnia's medieval feudal society. It is only from the 9th century that Frankish and Byzantine sources begin to mention early Slavic polities in the region. In this regard, the earliest widely acknowledged reference to Bosnia dates from the 10th century from a book written by one of the Byzantine emperors, during which period Bosnia is part of the Serbian state of Kaslav, after whose death in battle in about 960. Much of Bosnia finds itself briefly incorporated into the Croatian state. Shortly thereafter, in 997, Samuel of Bulgaria marches through Bosnia and asserts his overlordship in parts of it. However, only to be defeated by the Byzantine Empire, which annexes Bulgaria and asserts its power over Bosnia. This lasted until later in the century, when some parts of Bosnia are briefly incorporated into Croatian and the old version of Montenegro, which is known as this, from which the latter, Bosnia appears to have seceded in about 1101, upon which Bosnia's bands tried to rule for themselves. However, they all too often found themselves in a tug-of-war between Hungary and the Byzantine Empire. In the year of 1137, Hungary annexes most of Bosnia, then briefly losing her in 1167 to the Byzantine Empire before regaining her in 1180. Thus, prior to 1180 and the reign of Ban Kulin, parts of Bosnia were briefly found in Serbian or Croatian units, but neither neighbor had held the Bosnians long enough to acquire their loyalty or to impose any serious claim to Bosnia. In 1167, Byzantium reconquered Bosnia and eventually placed their own vassal as Bon. However, this vassalage was largely nominal, and Bosnia had, for all practical purposes, made itself into an independent state. The Bosnian leader presided over nearly 3 decades of peace and stability, during which he strengthened the country's economy through treaties with Dubrovnik and Venice. His rule also marked the start of a controversy with the Bosnian Church, an indigenous Christian sect, considered heretical by both the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. In response to Hungarian attempts to use church policies regarding the issue as a way to claim sovereignty over Bosnia, Kulin held a council of loyal church leaders to renounce the heresy in 1203. Despite this, Hungarian ambitions remained unchanged long after Kulin's death in 1204, waning only after an unsuccessful invasion in 1254, which also fostered the schism of the Bosnian Church. Bosnian history from then until the early 14th century was marked by the power struggle between the Subic and the Kotromanic families. This conflict came to an end in 1322, when the Kotromanic became Bon. By the time of their death in 1353, he had succeeded in annexing territories to the north and west, as well as Sahumi and parts of Dalmatia. He was succeeded by his nephew following a prolonged struggle with nobility and interfamily strife, gained full control over the country in 1367. Bosnia grew in both size and power, finally becoming an independent kingdom in 1377. Following his death in 1391, however, Bosnia fell into a long period of decline. The Ottoman Empire had already started its conquest of Europe and posed a major threat to the Balkans throughout the first half of the 15th century. Finally, after decades of political and social instability, Bosnia officially fell in 1463, while resistance was active and fierce for a few more centuries. The southern regions of Bosnia, nowadays known as Herzegovina, would follow in 1483, with the Hungarian-backed resignated Bosnian kingdom being the last to succumb in 1527. The Ottoman conquest of Bosnia marked a new era in the country's history and introduced tremendous changes in the political and cultural landscape of the region. Although the kingdom had been crushed and its high nobility executed, the Ottomans nonetheless allowed for the preservation of Bosnia's identity by incorporating it as an integral province of the Ottoman Empire with its historical name and territorial integrity, a unique case among subjugated states in the Balkans. The 4 centuries of Ottoman rule also had a drastic impact on Bosnia's population makeup, which changed several times as a result of the empire's conquests, frequent wars with European powers, migrations, and epidemics. A native Slavic-speaking Muslim community emerged and eventually became the largest ethno-religious group. The Bosnian Franciscans were protected by official imperial decree, although on the ground these guarantees were often disregarded and their numbers dwindled. The Orthodox community in Bosnia, initially confined to Herzegovina and southeastern Bosnia, spread throughout the country during this period and went on to experience relative prosperity until the 19th century. Meanwhile, the native schismatic Bosnian church disappeared altogether. As the Ottoman Empire thrived and expanded into Central Europe, Bosnia was relieved of the pressures of being a frontier province and experienced a prolonged period of general welfare and prosperity. A number of cities such as Sarajevo and Mostar were established and grew into major regional centers of trade and urban culture. By the late 17th century, however, the Ottoman Empire's military misfortunes caught up with the country, and the conclusion of the Great Turkish War with the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 once again made Bosnia the empire's westernmost province, but they allowed some of the Bosnian tribes to immigrate into the Arabian countries. The following 100 years were marked by further military failures, numerous revolts within Bosnia, and several outbursts of plague. In the Austro-Russian-Turkish War, in a few battles and checkpoints, Bosnian men and women fought and lost their lives. A French account described the bravery and battle of Bosnian Muslim women who fought in the war. Later, agrarian unrest eventually sparked the Herzegovinian Rebellion, a widespread peasant uprising. In 1875, the conflict rapidly spread and came to involve several Balkan states and great powers, which eventually forced the Ottomans to cede administration of the country to Austria-Hungary through the Treaty of Berlin in 1878, with the aim of establishing the province as a stable political model that would help dissipate rising South Slav nationalism. Habsburg rule did much to codify laws, to introduce new political practices, and generally to provide for modernization. The Habsburgs took special care to integrate local Muslims into the fabric of empire, continuing, for example, to publish a provincial yearbook, much like the Ottomans, in Turkish for over a decade after the end of Ottoman rule. The idea of a unified South Slavic state became a popular political ideology in the region at the time, including in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Austro-Hungarian government's decision to formally annex Bosnia in 1908 added to the sense of urgency among these nationalists. These political tensions caused by all of these culminated on June 28, 1914, when a young Bosnian revolutionary assassinated the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, in Sarajevo. The event set off a chain of events that led to the outbreak of World War I. Although 10% of Bosnian population died, serving in the armies or being killed by various warring states, Bosnia itself managed to escape the conflict relatively unscathed. Following World War I, Bosnia was incorporated into the South Slav Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, soon renamed Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavian tension between the states was always present, especially in Bosnia, where Serbia was trying to get more control over the policies and politics. Over the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was once conquered by Nazi forces in World War II. All of Bosnia was ceded to the independent state of Croatia, the NDH. The NDH rule over Bosnia led to widespread persecution and genocide. The Jewish population was nearly exterminated. Hundreds of thousands of Serbs died either in concentration camps or in widespread mass killings by militias. Many Serbs themselves took up arms and joined the Serbian nationalist movement with an aim of establishing an ethnically homogeneous Greater Serbian state. The Chetniks were responsible for widespread persecution and murder of non-Serbs and communist sympathizers, with the Muslim population in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Sandžak being a primary target. Once captured, Muslim villages were systematically massacred by the Chetniks. The total estimate of Muslims killed is between 80,000 and 100,000, most likely about 86,000, or 6.7% of their population, 8.1% in Bosnia alone. Several Bosnian Muslim paramilitary units joined the NDH forces to counter their own persecution in the hands of the Serbs in Bosnia. On October 12, 1941, a group of 108 notable Muslim citizens of Sarajevo signed the Resolution of Sarajevo Muslims, by which they condemned the persecution of Serbs organized, and they made distinction between Muslims who participated in such persecutions and the wider Muslim population, presented information about the persecutions of Muslims by Serbs, and requested security for all citizens of the country, regardless of their identity. According to the U.S. Holocaust Museum, 320,000 to 340,000 ethnic Serbs were murdered. According to the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum and Research Center, more than 500,000 Serbs were murdered in horribly sadistic ways. 250,000 were expelled, and another 200,000 were forced to convert during World War II in the independent state of Croatia, modern-day Croatia and Bosnia. Starting in 1941, Yugoslav communists organized their own multi-ethnic resistance group, the Partisans, who fought against the Axis, the Chetniks, and all of them. They too committed numerous atrocities, mainly against political opponents of all ethnicities. Some Bosnian Muslims joined them, and they pledged allegiance to both Adolf Hitler and NDH leaders. The division was the first SS division, which was constituted of non-Germans. On November 25, 1943, the Anti-Fascist Council of National Liberation of Yugoslavia held a founding conference where Bosnia and Herzegovina was re-established as a republic within the Yugoslavian Federation and its Ottoman borders. Military success eventually prompted the Allies to support the partisans. On April 6, 1945, Sarajevo was captured by the partisans. The end of the war resulted in the establishment of the Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia, with the Constitution of 1946 officially making Bosnia and Herzegovina one of the 6 constituent republics in the new state. Because of its central geographic position, with the People's Republic for much of the 50s and 60s, the 70s saw the ascension of the strong Bosnian political elite while working within the communist system. Politicians reinforced and protected the sovereignty of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Their efforts proved key during the turbulent period following Tito's death in 1980 and are today considered some of the early steps towards Bosnian independence. However, the Republic could not escape the increasing nationalistic climate of the time unscathed. The first multi-party parliamentary elections held on the 18th and 25th of November 1990 led to a National Assembly dominated by three ethnically based parties, which had formed a loose coalition to oust the communists from power. Croatia and Slovenia's subsequent declarations of independence and the warfare that ensued placed Bosnia and Herzegovina and its three constituent peoples in an awkward position. A significant split soon developed on the issue of whether to stay with the Yugoslav Federation or seek independence. A declaration of sovereignty on October 15, 1991 was followed by a referendum for independence from Yugoslavia on February 29th and March 1st, 1992. The referendum was boycotted by the great majority of Bosnian Serbs, so with a voter turnout of 64%, 98% of which voted in favor of the proposal, Bosnia became an independent state on March 3, 1992. While the first casualty of the war is debated, significant Serbian offensive began in March 1992 in eastern and northern Bosnia. Following a tense period of escalating tensions, the opening shots in the incipient Bosnian conflict were fired when Serb paramilitary forces attacked Bosnian villages on March 7, 1992, and in March 15th. These minor attacks were followed by a much more serious Serb artillery attacks on March 19th and the 24th. The killing of a Bosniak civilian woman in April 5th by a sniper while she was demonstrating in Sarajevo against the raising of barricades by Bosnian Serbs is widely regarded as marking the start of warfare between the three major communities. Open warfare began in Sarajevo on April 6. International recognition of Bosnia and Herzegovina meant that the Yugoslav People's Army officially withdrew from the Republic's territory, although their Bosnian Serb members merely joined the Army of Republic Srpska. Armed and equipped from JNA stockpiles in Bosnia, supported by volunteers, the Republic of Srpska's offensives in 1992 managed to place much of the country under its control. By 1993, when an armed conflict erupted between the Sarajevo government and the Croat statelet of Herzegovina, around 70% of the country was controlled by the Serbs. In March of 1994, the signing of the Washington Accords between the Bosniak and ethnic Croatian leaders led to the creation of a joint Bosniak-Croat Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This, along with an international outrage of Serb war crimes and atrocities, helped turn the tide of the war. The signing of the Dayton Agreement in Paris by the presidents of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, and Serbia brought a halt to the fighting, roughly establishing the basic structure of the present-day state. The 3 years of war and bloodshed had left between 90,000 and 110,000 people killed and more than 2 million displaced. Since its 1992 independence and the 1995 constitutional framework of the Dayton Agreement, Bosnia has followed a path of state building while remaining under final international supervision through the figure of the High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia is a federation of two entities, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Republic of Srpska, as well as the District of Brčko. Each of the entities has its own constitution and extensive legislative powers. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a potential candidate country for accession into the European Union. Bosnia and Herzegovina submitted its formal application for EU membership on February 15, 2016. The EU Council conditioned its consideration to further progress on the implementation of the reform agenda, as well as to the adoption of the SAA to take into account the EU accession of Croatia, and to an agreement on a functioning coordination mechanism on EU matters. The accession of Bosnia into NATO is in the negotiation phase, and the Membership Action Plan was signed in April 2010. It requires Bosnia and Herzegovina to define the issue of property over defense assets before NATO may consider the next steps. Bosnian political parties have different attitudes towards NATO. While Bosniak and Bosnian Croat parties support it, Bosnian Serbs do not. On February 4, 2014, the protests against the government of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of the country's two entities, began in the northern towns. Workers from several factories, which were privatized and which have now gone bankrupt, united to demand action over jobs, unpaid salaries, and pensions. Soon, protests spread to the rest of the Federation. The violent clashes reported in close to 20 towns. The Bosnian news media reported that hundreds of people had been injured during the protests, including dozens of police officers, with bursts of violence in Sarajevo in the northern city of Tuzla, in Mostar in the south, and in Zenica in central Bosnia. The same level of unrest or activism did not occur in the Republic of Srpska, but hundreds of people also gathered in support of protests in the town of Banja Luka against its separate government. The protests marked the largest outbreak of public anger over high unemployment and 2 decades of political inertia in the country since the end of the Bosnian War in 1995. That is the end of the history of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now time for some statistics. Bosnia's land area is 51,200 square kilometers. The population is about 3.56 million. The GDP is about 25 billion, and the GDP per capita is just above 8,000. That is the end of the simplified history of Bosnia and Herzegovina.